A few hours ago, my friend who runs the channel sent me a comment that was posted on one of my videos, but the user removed it shortly after. I have to assume it was because they corrected themselves, but I'm not sure. They might have just been afraid of my response, afraid of confrontation, or something along those lines. I can't really assume too much because there's an unlimited amount of reasons why they could have done this. But unlucky for them, whenever a comment is posted, it's sent to the email linked to the YouTube account, which is the email that my friend has access to. I do not have access to the email or the YouTube account. And so he sent me the email, a picture of the email. Once again, as always in these types of videos, I'm not going to state the name of the person who posted the comment, but I'm going to read the comment and then reply to it. So this is actually a deleted comment from the poster themselves, and it's in response to basically it was one of my feminism videos where I talk about feminism is for quote-unquote equalism. I talk about this video where this guy talks about, feminism is for equalism, which isn't actually a word, but in actuality, feminism is for supremacy, female supremacy. At least the radicals are in general. And a guy posted a comment pointing out that feminism is not feminism by definition is not for supremacy. And I responded by stating that that's true. Feminism is not for supremacy in theory, but in practice it is, because women and men are equal in numerous ways, yada yada. Pretty long comment, but I mentioned that in a lot of ways, in quite a few ways, women hold an advantage. And so this person was responding to that comment where I talk about the advantages that women hold and how feminism is then for supremacy. And she says, and there is girl in her name, so I'm assuming it's a girl. She says, "Tell me that women hold an advantage when they get paid less." So this is talking about the supposed wage gap. And I have a lot to say on this issue, but I'll probably keep it limited for this video. This is some bullshit that's being peddled by feminists. And the most ironic part is I have seen numerous feminists themselves, less radical, come out and say that the wage gap does not actually exist. It is something that was made up. Well, not made up. It exists in a pure form, in the sense that if you take the salary of men versus the salary of women as at face value, then that's what it is. It does not take in any of the important factors. And even some feminists are admitting this. And so it's really just lies from this point on. People have studied this. Economists have fucking studied this. Posted so many different things about this issue, about how there is no actual wage gap if you bring in all the important factors, which the wage gap lie does not bring in. So this person has fallen victim to one of the common lies peddled by radical feminists, and that's that the wage gap exists. The wage gap does not exist. The wage gap, 77 cents for every dollar, is absolute bullshit. It does not include any of the important factors needed to make a good judgment on the issue of a wage gap. Because you can't take face value two different genders. Otherwise, you could take face value the average that a Caucasian makes versus an African American and say that racism exists solely because black people on average make less than white people. But you don't bring in the factors of, there's an endless list of factors, and I'd suggest looking them up, but like schooling, prior education, experience, amount of time at that position, actual position itself, etc., etc. There's a long list of things that's not brought in. If you take it at face value, then you could say, I mean, I know racism exists, but you can't look at racism existing purely based on the face value of Caucasians, so whites versus blacks, because there are so many other factors involved. If you break it down, there might be a couple cent wage gap between blacks and whites if you bring in all the important factors, but not big enough for there to be probable cause. And this is what's brought in with the wage gap between supposed wage gap between men and women. When you start introducing these factors, the wage gap gets smaller and smaller for every factor introduced until it gets down to about roughly a 2-cent gap. But that's not big enough to cause enough of a problem. However, what's even worse than that is feminists are always talking about, oh, equal pay, equal pay, equal pay. But for the demographic of single, and by single, I don't mean not dating, single means not married. Single childless women between the ages of 20 and 30 make 8 cents more than their male counterparts. And feminists look at that statistic right there and they state, oh, that's progress. That is not progress. That's a regression. That is a wage gap in itself. You are purposely trying to push a wage gap in the opposite direction. This is more evidence for this supremacy that radical feminists are seeking. If there is an 8-cent wage gap in the opposite direction, that is not progress. Progress for equal pay would mean going from, well, the 2-cent wage gap that exists to a 0% wage gap, which would be possible, but very unlikely. And it's even iffy to say that this 2-cent wage gap exists. If you, it's arguable based on the factors that could be brought in, and some reports report 2 cents, some reports report 0. Some reports report, that sounds really weird, reports report, but some things report even slight advantage towards women. And so you cannot say that women get paid less, because that is only on face value. That is because women, on average, go for the lower paying degrees in college. They work less. They aren't as ambitious, and they have to take more time off because of maternity leave, which you can't argue is sexism because that's biological. You can't force men to have the baby, but, you know, and there's no need to take paternity leave because that doesn't make sense. There's nothing going on for the man other than supporting the child, which you would need to work to do. And so all these factors brought in show that women do not make less than men. And you need to look at all the factors involved. Moreover, another thing that pisses me off on this issue is there are so many feminists peddling this bullshit that there aren't enough women in the sciences, which I agree there aren't enough women in the sciences, but here's the problem. All you feminists that are complaining about this are going into gender studies versus the sciences. Go into the sciences yourself instead of trying to push all these other women to go into the sciences, which then, because you're talking about women's rights, makes them want to go into gender studies. It's bullshit, and it's really annoying. And if they go into these better degrees, if women change their stereotypical degree, what the average woman goes for in college, if they change that to a higher paying degree, then that wage gap goes, the face value wage gap, which is not bringing in any factors, decreases a ton right there. It's all based on women's choices, not what they're encouraged to do. But, like I said, none of this matters because the wage gap does not exist. When you bring in the actual statistics, women make the same as men. Plain and simple. That's what matters. So when you say that women do hold an advantage, they hold an advantage economically, socially, politically, and before the law, which are 4 ways that are pretty important. You cannot say, or you cannot tell me that to say something like this, that I'm not allowed to say that women hold an advantage when they get paid less, because not only do they not get paid less, in some demographics, they get paid more, 8% more, which is a substantial wage gap compared to the possible 2 cents that women actually face, as well as women do hold these advantages. So I am not a warrior trying to get rid of these advantages. I don't care that women face 60% less jail time for the exact same crime as men. Yeah, that is bullshit that they do. But I don't care enough about that. Number one, it doesn't affect me. I'm not someone who commits crimes. And even if I do, it's like a petty, like, speeding ticket. I've never even gotten a speeding ticket before. But it's so annoying when these feminists argue that somehow women are oppressed in society, which is not the case at all. Women are equal to men. The genders are as equal as they're going to get. And if you are only going to equate women in ways that they are quote unquote oppressed, where it's really just a slight disadvantage, then you are actually bringing women above men. You are for supremacy, whether you notice it or not. You may not notice it, which is understandable. But that's what you have to realize, is that women do hold the advantage. They don't get paid less. The wage gap is bullshit.